Hello, and this is Samantha Warwick with her analysis of Batman Knightfall Volume 1. Uh, there are quite a few, names as far as the creative team is concerned. You have Doug Monich, Chuck Dixon, Alan Grant. You have the writers like Jim Aparo and Jim Ballant. You have the pencilers Scott Hanna, Norm Brayfogle, and Rick Burchett. Inkers Adrian Roy, Klaus Janson. You have colorists like Richard Starking and Ken Brusnick. Letters is Kelly Jones. And of course you have Bob Kane and Bill Finger, who created Batman. Now, this is a pretty thick comic. It is 640 pages, but only about 630 of it is actual comic story. This is not a true graphic novel. It is a compilation of about 24 other individual comics. It introduces both Bane and also the character Jean Paul Valley, also known as Azrael. It's very easy to know where the acts are. Act 1 is starts, and it ends on page 61. Act 2 begins on 63 and ends on 548. And Act 3 begins on 551. Although this is a Batman comic, ultimately I see this as being Bane's story, as we get to see him rise from his time at a prison. We get to see him break the back, as it's called, in Act 2, which basically cements his place at the top of Gotham, more or less. And in Act 3, we get to see his fall. It is very satisfactory in that, although this is only a volume 1 of a 3-volume set, the story does have a beginning, middle, and end. And at the end, when Jean Paul Valley stands over Bane's broken body, as Bane had stood over Batman's in Act 2, you will find that it is a very satisfactory ending. Now, there is also, of course, this deals with the overarching arc of Bane, but there is also a strong character arc in Jean Paul Valley, whereas he is just a good-natured guy, worries about Batman and how he's doing. But once Batman, or Bruce Wayne, decides to make him the Batman replacement until he recovers, Azrael goes from being good-natured to taking the dark persona of Batman a bit too far. He becomes far more reckless and far more dark, in that he doesn't always keep an eye out for innocence. His main view is getting the bad guy. If an innocent gets hurt in the way, he doesn't rightfully care about it. And this goes on to the point where he reimagines the Batman costume into his own design, which is far darker. He has claws, looks like he has visible armor. His entire face is covered. But in the end, when he has Bane in his grasp, and Bane asks him to kill him, he takes a note from Bruce Wayne, and instead of killing his enemy, like like how he had been wanting to do throughout his entire stay as Batman. He opts to let him live and be imprisoned. And to Robin, as he sees Jean-Paul Valley's mental state change like that, he understands at the end that he has become Batman. He accepts him as a Batman because he didn't just completely and totally kill his opponent, thus truly taking the law into his own hands. Now, there are several transitions within this story. Some of them are a bit hard to find. A good one is on page 117. And I know you can't read this, but you will see right here the character Amygdala, who has been busted out of Arkham Asylum by Bane, is defending the ventriloquist after a group at a bar laughed at him. And the next panel down, we suddenly see somebody's body going out a window. And it is left up to our imagination as to how he was sent flying through that window. Now, of course, there are few, and they are a bit difficult to find. But once you find them, you know it's a transition. I don't really understand McCloud's ideas of transition very well. And I've read through that part about 5 times. And the only thing I can do is show that there are different kinds of transitions within this volume of comic. And there are quite a few moment-to-moment transitions. In fact, one of them happening on page 116. You have the bar patrons here just looking at the ventriloquist, and then a moment later you see them all just busting out laughing like they think he's a joke. Naturally, there are more action-to-action and subject-to-subject transitions, but there are no non sequitur transitions. All the transitions have a logical path, and a very visible one. Now, in class we've been talked about the page as a mini comic idea. And there are 2 in here that I have chosen. One is on page 133, and the other is on page 145. Alright. Now, we see a villain right here on this page. You have a shit. You see him introduce himself and made his intention. There's a begin, middle, and end, at least as what I can see within this page. And there is another on page 145, as mentioned, dealing with the same character. It's a bit more obvious. Uh, you see the villain introducing introducing what he's there for. And you see the women all huddled here, suddenly, with one of them suddenly jumping out in this panel as he's trying to pull this woman off to be a sacrifice. He ends up stopping her charge by kicking her in the stomach, and she becomes his sacrifice number 2. But don't get me wrong, there are times when the page as a mini comic idea is not used. I chose those purely at what I came to understand as page as a mini comic. But there are other things. Now, the directional flow of the story is pretty solid and obvious until you get to the minor side story involving the Scarecrow. Given his nature, the comic in and of itself has evolved to take on his persona, and it's not very cut and dry, clean and quick. So, yeah, there's going to be confusion there. Now, if you're a fan of Batman, as far as my classmates are concerned, if you're a fan of Batman, I would read this because it shows him at his most vulnerable. Most of the time, he seems almost superhuman because of what he can take. But this comic shows that he's human. He can be vulnerable. He can be beaten. But it still doesn't stop him, ultimately. For my friends that are not in my class, I would recommend this to them, basically because they are all fans of the Batman villains. And thanks to Bane destroying Arkham Asylum, they all fled out. So you get to see all of them. Joker makes an appearance. There's a small section on Two-Face. There's Amygdala and the Ventriloquist, as I mentioned earlier. But that's it. Fun fact, though, in the comic world, this isn't the only time Batman has had his back broken. In the climax to Year 1 of Injustice: Gods Among Us, Superman breaks Batman's back to take him out of commission by standing on it. And this takes him out of commission for much of Year 2. Now, I understand if this has been confusing, I apologize. But really, this is a awesome book, and one that I will be reading further into at a later date. Thank you.